Look at her, a mother fainting, the moment her dead son is lowered from the cross. It is one of the most tender images ever painted, and for a time, the Church wanted images like it gone, not because it was crude, not because it was ugly, but because something about a grieving mother, this grieving mother, was considered dangerous. Paintings of this exact moment were quietly taken down, in Rome, removed from view. Theologians wrote against it. A feast meant to honour it was refused. And yet, here it survives, the most copied religious painting of its century, hiding the very idea that frightened them. The strange part is that the warning was never really about the feint itself. It was about a single curve in this painting, one line that most people never notice. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And you will understand why some men of the Church believed this image said too much. Let's start with what is certain. This is the Descent from the Cross, painted around 1435 by the Flemish master Rogier van der Weyden. Today it hangs in the Prado in Madrid. 10 near life-size figures pressed into a shallow gold box, as if a carved altar had suddenly come alive. The dead Christ, lowered by 2 men. Joseph of Arimathea, in cloth of gold. Nicodemus, white-bearded, holding the body through a white shroud, careful, even now, not to touch the skin directly. And then the grief begins to spread. John, in red, lunges to catch the collapsing Virgin. Her sisters weep. And at the far right, Mary Magdalene bends into a pose the human body can barely hold. Before we go further, look up here. Hidden in the painted stonework, 2 tiny crossbows. Easy to miss. They are a signature. This altarpiece was commissioned by the Crossbowmen's Guild of Leuven for their chapel. That is established fact. Those little weapons tell us who paid for a crucifixion. Remember the crossbow? It comes back. Now the thing that should feel wrong. Look at the Virgin's body, and look at her sons. They are the same shape, the same fall, the same bend. She doesn't simply mourn beside him, her whole body has become an echo of his. Why would a painter do that? To understand the curve, you have to understand the world that produced it. This was the age of what scholars call affective devotion. Believers were taught not just to know the passion of Christ, but to feel it in the body, almost unbearably. Books like The Imitation of Christ and the Meditations of Mystics asked the faithful to stand at the cross and suffer alongside Mary. Rogier builds that idea into the ground itself. Down here, at the base of the cross, a skull and a bone. By tradition, this is the skull of Adam. The hill of the crucifixion, Golgotha, means the place of the skull. And there was an old belief that Adam, the first man, was buried at the very spot where Christ would die. So in one image, the first man and the new one, the tree of the fall and the cross of redemption. Where sin entered the world, salvation answers it. And the mother? In this theology, her suffering is not a side note. Her grief participates in the sacrifice. Scholars call it Compassio co-suffering. The art historian Otto von Simpson read the matching curves of mother and son as exactly this. Her compassion makes her, in some sense, a sharer in his redemptive death. That is an interpretation, a powerful and widely held one. The curve is real. What it means is where centuries of argument begin, because there's a problem hiding inside this beautiful idea. Open the 4 Gospels, and you will not find this feint. Mary stands at the cross. She does not collapse. The fainting Virgin, what Italians called lo spasimo, the swoon, comes from elsewhere. From an apocryphal text, the Gospel of Nicodemus, from mystics, from the deep human wish that a mother's heart would break completely. It was beloved. It spread across Europe. The Franciscans championed it. And that is precisely when it began to make powerful men nervous. Here is where the story turns. As early as 1506, a leading theologian, Cardinal Cajetan, attacked the swoon. His objection, in plain terms, the Gospel of John says Mary stood by the cross. a woman fainting dead away could not also be standing. And the grace that allowed her to endure, he argued, would not have let her collapse. To him, the faint wasn't tender. It was wrong, unscriptural, misleading. He was not alone. As the Counter-Reformation hardened, more churchmen turned against it, Catholic and Protestant alike. The image was too emotional, too human, too far past the text. And then came the part that still unsettles. At least in Rome, there appears to have been real censorship. Paintings of the swooning Virgin removed from public view. An engraving of the scene reportedly refused publication in the city and printed in Paris instead, out of reach of the censors. Now here is where most retellings get it wrong, and where the truth is actually stranger. The Church never issued a universal ban. There was no single decree erasing the fainting Virgin everywhere. Many images stayed exactly where they were. What happened was quieter and, in a way, more haunting. Disapproval, argument, local removal. A slow institutional unease about an image of compassion. They didn't burn it out of the world, they simply began to look away from it. So what did the Church decide a grieving mother was allowed to do? For the answer, look at a painting made about 80 years later by Raphael. Another passion scene, another virgin at her son's suffering. But this Mary does not faint. She sinks, she reaches. Her knees give, but she stays conscious. The Prado itself reads this as the compromise, the Church's official position made visible. She may grieve, she may nearly break, but she may not fall completely away, which means Van der Weyden's Virgin. This one is standing on the far side of a line that was about to be drawn. He painted the moment of total collapse, the mother whose grief mirrors her son's so completely that her body becomes his. The exact thing the next century would decide was too much. That curve, the one you can no longer unsee, wasn't decoration. It was the argument, drawn in paint, decades before the words caught up to it. We began with a question. Why would the Church ever fear a grieving mother? Now you know it wasn't her tears they feared. It was what her body was saying, that her suffering came so close to her son's that the two could be mirrored in a single shape. A mother folding into the form of her dead child. Grief so complete, it looks like a second crucifixion. The men who looked away from images like this weren't cruel. They were guarding a line between honouring a mother's sorrow and letting it rise to the level of salvation itself. And Van der Weyden caught the instant before that line existed, when faith still allowed itself to feel everything. He was, by many accounts, the first European painter to render a real tear, a small, shining bead of grief made permanent in paint. Of all the things this picture freezes, perhaps that is the truest. The moment sorrow became something you could see, and the Church had to decide how much of it the faithful could bear. Look at her one last time. Not as a figure in an altarpiece. As a mother, at the lowest moment a person can know, painted so honestly that it frightened the institution that commissioned it. And the painting is not finished giving up its secrets. Behind Joseph stands a man holding a jar of ointment. A figure who belongs to no gospel and no tradition. Van der Weyden seems simply to have invented him. No one is certain who he is meant to be. Up on the ladder, a young man holds the drawn nails and reaches a hand over the painted frame, into our world, as if the boundary between the holy and the living had quietly dissolved. We'll follow those threads another time. For now, sit with the curve, the mother who became the shape of her son. It was always there. You just hadn't been told to look. If you'd like to uncover the next one, comment next part